A realistic photo of a young woman with a calm expression standing indoors, wearing a beige sweater, positioned on the right side of the image. On the left side, depict a dimly lit, cozy interior hallway with soft, natural light coming from a window. The mood is quiet and mysterious, hinting at a deeper story. No text in the image. The text came at 2:17 a.m. A single, icy sentence that burned itself into my retinas as I stared at my phone in the dim glow of the Whitaker estate's guest room. They are lying about her. Trust no one. No sender name, no context, just those 7 words pulsing on the screen like a heartbeat. I sat up in bed, the silk sheet slipping to my waist, my breath catching in my throat. The Hamptons mansion was silent, save for the distant crash of waves against the shore, but the air felt charged, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I read the message again, my thumb hovering over the reply button, but what could I say? Who was her? And who was they? I'm Claire Thompson, a 32-year-old pediatric nurse practitioner, and until that moment, I thought I knew fear. I'd faced sobbing parents in the ER, held tiny hands through painful procedures, and once stared down a drunk driver who'd crashed into my clinic's parking lot. But this was different. This was a shadow moving in the dark, a warning I couldn't place. My husband, Daniel, was thousands of miles away in the Caribbean with his family. The Whitakers, old money elites who'd never accepted me, and I was alone in their sprawling, opulent prison of a home, tasked with caring for their supposedly mute, paralyzed niece, Sophie. The text felt like a crack in the perfect facade of their world, and I was about to fall through it. The Whitakers had left that morning, a whirlwind of Louis Vuitton luggage and barked orders, their private jet waiting to whisk them to Barbados for a 3-week family retreat. Edward Whitaker, the patriarch, had loomed over me in the foyer, his steel-growl eyes cutting through me like a blade. "Claire, you're family now, so we trust you with Sophie," he'd said. His voice smooth but laced with a warning. Follow the protocol exactly, no deviations. Margaret, his wife, had offered a tight smile, her Botox-smooth face betraying nothing but disdain. "It's such a burden, dear, but you're so capable," she'd purred, the word dripping with condescension. Victoria, Daniel's older sister and Sophie's mother, had barely looked at me, tossing a binder of care instructions onto the marble console. "Everything's in there, don't screw it up," she'd snapped, before sashing out the door. Daniel, my husband of 4 years, had been the worst. He'd hugged me, his architect's hands warm but fleeting, and mumbled, "It's just 3 weeks, Claire. You'll be fine. Dad needs me for some meetings." He hadn't met my eyes, hadn't asked how I felt about abandoning my patients mid-shift to play nursemaid in a house that made me feel like an intruder. The Whitakers had no use for my working-class roots, my nursing degree from a state university, or my stubborn refusal to bow to their wealth. To them, I was an inconvenience, a smudge on their polished legacy. And yet, here I was, alone with their darkest secret. Sophie, the 9-year-old girl they claimed was born broken, mute, and immobile. A tragic burden they paraded at charity galas for sympathy and donations. I swung my legs out of bed, the hardwood floor cold against my bare feet, and checked my phone again. The text hadn't vanished. I typed a quick reply, "Who is this?" but hesitated, my thumb frozen. What if this was a trap? The Whitakers were meticulous, their lives a carefully curated performance of power and perfection. A wrong move could unravel everything. My marriage, my career, maybe even my safety. I deleted the message and set the phone face down on the nightstand, my heart hammering. Sleep was out of the question now. I needed answers, and the only place to start was Sophie. The hallway was a cavern of shadows. the estate's high ceilings and gilded moldings swallowing the light from the sconces. The air smelled of lavender and old money, a scent that clung to everything the Whitakers owned. Sophie's room was at the end of the corridor, behind a heavy oak door engraved with her initials. I'd been in there earlier, adjusting her feeding tube and checking her vitals as per the binder's instructions. She'd looked so small in her medical bed, her dark hair fanned across the pillow, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. But those eyes, they'd caught me off guard. They weren't vacant or lifeless, as the family claimed. They were sharp, almost knowing, like they were trying to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear. I pushed the door open, the hinges silent, and stepped inside. The room was a sterile mockery of a child's space. Hospital-grade equipment, a motorized wheelchair, and a flat screen playing endless loops of cartoon songs. Sophie lay still, her chest rising and falling under the thin blanket. I checked the monitor. Pulse steady, oxygen normal. Everything was as it should be, except for the prickling at the back of my neck, the feeling that I was being watched. I scanned the room, my eyes landing on a small black dome in the corner of the ceiling. A camera. My stomach twisted. The Whitakers weren't just controlling Sophie, they were surveilling her. And now, me. I moved closer to the bed, keeping my voice low. "Sophie, can you hear me?" No response, just the soft hum of the ventilator. I leaned in, studying her face. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, but her eyes flicked toward me, quick as a bird's wing. I froze. "Sophie?" I whispered again, my pulse racing. The binder said she was non-communicative, but that glance was deliberate, wasn't it? I reached for her hand, small and cool in mine, and squeezed gently. "If you can hear me, blink twice." Her eyelids fluttered. Once. Twice. My breath caught. This wasn't possible. The Whitakers had shown me medical records, specialist reports, all confirming Sophie's congenital neurological disorder. She'd never spoken, never walked, never done anything but exist as their tragic centerpiece. But those blinks were real, and they were a plea. I glanced at the camera, its red light blinking like an accusation. If I was right, if Sophie was aware, then everything I'd been told was a lie. And that text, "They're lying about her," was the first crack in the Whitakers' perfect world. I stepped back, my mind spinning. I needed to think, to process, but the camera's gaze felt like a weight on my chest. I left Sophie's room, closing the door softly, and headed to the kitchen to clear my head. The Whitaker estate was a maze of excess. Marble countertops, chandeliers that cost more than my annual salary, and a refrigerator stocked with artisanal cheeses and vintage wines. I filled a glass with water, my hands trembling, and sat at the island, staring at the binder Victoria had left. It was thick, clinical, filled with medication schedules, feeding protocols, and emergency contacts. But now it felt like a script, a prop in a play I hadn't auditioned for. My phone buzzed and I nearly dropped the glass. Another text, same unknown number. "Check the safe in her room. Code is April 12th, 16. I stared at the screen, my mouth dry. April 12th, 2016. Sophie's birth date, if I remembered the records correctly. Whoever was texting me knew too much, and that made them dangerous. But the safe, if it held answers, I couldn't ignore it. I glanced at the kitchen clock. 3:04 a.m. The estate was silent, but silence in this house felt like a predator waiting to strike. I crept back to Sophie's room, my bare feet silent on the Persian rugs. The camera's red light glowed, and I positioned myself out of its view, near the bed. The safe was built into the wall, hidden behind a framed watercolor of a sailboat. I slid the painting aside, revealing a digital keypad. My fingers hovered over the buttons. If I was wrong, if this was a trap, I could trigger an alarm, alert the Whitakers, or worse, but Sophie's blinks, those desperate, deliberate blinks, pushed me forward. I entered the code 041216. The safe beeped, and I flinched, expecting sirens. Instead, the door clicked open. Inside was a single manila envelope, unmarked. I pulled it out, my hand shaking, and glanced at Sophie. Her eyes were open, watching me, wide with something that looked like hope. I opened the envelope, spilling its contents onto the bed. A handwritten journal, a USB drive, and a folded document. The journal's cover was scrawled with childish handwriting. Sophie's secrets. My heart stopped. A 9-year-old who couldn't speak or move didn't keep a diary. Unless everything I'd been told was a lie. I flipped open the journal, its pages filled with neat, painstaking script. They make me take pills that make me sleepy. Mommy says if I talk, they'll send me away forever. Grandpa says the money is ours, but it's mine. I heard them. I'm not sick. My vision blurred, not from tears, but from rage. I scanned the document next. A trust agreement, dated 5 years ago, naming Sophie as the beneficiary of a $10 million 0-cents fund from her paternal grandparents, the Blackwells, who'd died in a plane crash. Victoria was the trustee, with full control until Sophie turned 18, unless she was deemed incompetent. The USB drive was a mystery, but I didn't have a computer handy. I stuffed the contents back into the envelope and closed the safe, my mind racing. Sophie wasn't disabled. She was a prisoner, drugged and silenced to steal her inheritance. The Whitakers weren't just cruel, they were monsters. But why me? Why was I the one to uncover this? And who was texting me, pulling me into their web? A floorboard creaked in the hallway, and I froze, shoving the envelope under Sophie's blanket. The door opened, and a man stepped inside. Not Daniel, not Edward, but a stranger in a black jacket, his face shadowed. "Mrs. Thompson?" he said, his voice low and clipped. "You're up late?" My mouth went dry, but I forced myself to stand, positioning myself between him and Sophie. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. "Think security," he said, his eyes flicking to the bed. "Heard a noise. Everything okay?" His hand rested on his belt, where a holstered gun gleamed in the dim light. My pulse thundered. The Whitakers had guards patrolling at night? Or was he something else? Someone sent to watch me? "Fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just checking Sophie's monitors. New environment, you know?" He studied me, his gaze lingering on the painting, slightly askew. "Right," he said finally. "Stick to the routine, Mrs. Thompson. Safer that way." He left, but his warning hung in the air like smoke. I waited until his footsteps faded, then turned to Sophie. "We're not safe here," I whispered. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time she nodded. A small, deliberate movement that shattered my last doubts. I had to protect her, no matter the cost. But the camera, the guard, the texts, they were closing in, and I was running out of time. The rest of the night passed in a blur of adrenaline and dread. I hid the envelope in my suitcase under a pile of scraps and lay awake listening for footsteps. By dawn, the estate was bathed in golden light, the ocean sparkling beyond the manicured lawns, but the beauty was a lie, a veneer over something rotten. I showered, dressed, and headed to the kitchen to prepare Sophie's morning medication, a cocktail of antipsychotics and muscle relaxants according to the binder. The pills were small, white, and unassuming, but now I saw them for what they were: chains. I poured the pills into my palm, staring at them. If Sophie was right, these were poisoning her, keeping her trapped in a body that wasn't hers. As a nurse, I'd sworn to do no harm, but giving her these could be the greatest harm of all. I glanced at the sink, the drain a tempting void. If I flushed them, I'd be defying the Whitakers, risking everything. But if I didn't, I'd be complicit in their crime. I tipped my hand, watching the pills spiral into the drain, and turned on the faucet. The water roared, washing away my hesitation. In Sophie's room, I prepared her nutritional shake, skipping the crushed pills. She was awake, her eyes tracking me with a mix of fear and trust. "I didn't give you the medicine," I whispered, adjusting her feeding tube. "How do you feel?" She blinked twice, then mouthed a single word. "Better." My chest tightened. This was real. She was real. And I was in deeper than I'd ever imagined. The day stretched on, a tightrope walk of normalcy and deception. I followed the binder's routine, bathing Sophie, adjusting her position, logging fake medication doses, while my mind churned. The journal burned a hole in my thoughts. I needed to read more, to understand the scope of the Whitakers' scheme, but the camera's red light never blinked off. I waited until noon, when the sun was high and the staff were busy, to slip back into Sophie's room with my laptop. I plugged in the USB drive, my hands slick with sweat. A single folder appeared, proof. Inside were videos, time-stamped from 6 years ago. I clicked one and a toddler appeared on the screen, giggling as she chased a butterfly in a garden. Her dark hair bounced, her voice clear as she shouted, "Look, Grandpa!" It was Sophie, vibrant and whole, before the drugs, before the lies. My throat closed. The Whitakers had stolen her childhood, her voice, her life, all for money. Another file was a scanned letter, dated 2 years after the videos. "To my dearest Sophie," it began. "If you're reading this, you're 18 and the truth is yours." It was from her paternal grandfather, Arthur Blackwell, detailing a $10 million 0-cents trust fund for Sophie, with a bombshell. A $75 million 0-cents estate would transfer to her at 25, but only if she controlled the initial trust and was deemed mentally competent. The letter hinted at distrust of the Whitakers, warning Sophie to beware their greed. The Blackwells had died in a plane crash months later, a crash the letter called convenient. My blood ran cold. Was it an accident? Or something worse? I closed the laptop, my hands shaking. The Whitakers weren't just after $10 million 0 cents. They were playing a long game, for a fortune 10 times that, and Sophie, this brave, brilliant girl, was their pawn. I looked at her, still in her bed, her eyes locked on mine. "You knew," I whispered. "You've known all along." She nodded again, and I saw the weight of years in her gaze, years of silence, of fear, of waiting for someone to listen. The journal was next. I read in snatches, hiding the pages under a blanket when a maid passed by. Sophie's words were a child's, but her pain was adult. "Mommy burns me with her cigarette when I move. She says it's my fault for being bad. Grandpa says the money will save the family, but it's mine." I heard him in the secret room downstairs. I pretend to sleep so they don't hurt me. My stomach churned. A secret room? I needed to find it, but the estate was a labyrinth, and I was already on borrowed time. My phone buzzed. Another text. "They know you opened the safe. Leave now." My heart stopped. I looked at the camera, its light steady, mocking. Had they seen me? Was the guard from last night reporting back? I typed a reply. "Who are you?" and hit send, but the message bounced back, undeliverable. Panic clawed at me. I was trapped in a house of lies, with a child who needed me and a family who'd stop at nothing to keep their secret. The afternoon brought a new threat. I was in the library, pretending to read the binder, when my phone rang. The screen showed an unknown number, and I answered, my voice steady despite the dread pooling in my gut. "Mrs. Thompson?" a man said, his tone cold as ice. "You're not following the protocol." My mouth went dry. "Who is this?" I asked, glancing around the empty room. "Stick to the schedule," he said. "No deviations. We're watching." The line went dead. I sat frozen, the phone heavy in my hand. We're watching. The camera in Sophie's room, the guard, the texts. Someone was tracking my every move. I needed evidence, something concrete to take to the authorities, but the Whitakers were a fortress of wealth and influence. Edward had judges on speed dial, Margaret chaired hospital boards, and Victoria's trust fund bought silence. I was a nurse, a nobody in their world, and I was starting to realize how dangerous this game was. I decided to search Victoria's office, a sleek space off the main hall, filled with designer furniture and untouched books. Sophie had mentioned her mother kept important papers there, and if I could find more proof, financial records, emails, anything, I could build a case. The door was locked, but I found a key under a potted orchid, just as Sophie's journal described. Inside, the air was heavy with Victoria's perfume, a cloying mix of jasmine and entitlement. I rifled through drawers, finding nothing but receipts and fashion magazines, until I reached the filing cabinet. It was locked, but the key worked here too. The top drawer held a folder labeled Sophie's Care. My hands trembled as I opened it. Medical records, dozens of them, detailed a healthy baby girl. Normal milestones, no issues. Until age 4, when her condition deteriorated overnight. The reports were signed by a Dr. Harlan Voss, a name I didn't recognize, but the prescriptions were damning. Antipsychotics, sedatives, muscle relaxants, all for a child with no documented need. I snapped photos with my phone, my heart racing. This was fraud, abuse, a crime so monstrous I could barely comprehend it. A noise outside the door made me jump. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, approached. I shoved the folder back, locked the cabinet, and ducked behind a velvet curtain just as the door opened. The groundskeeper, a burly man with a scar across his cheek, stepped inside, his radio crackling. "She's been in here," he said into it. "I can smell her." My blood froze. He was talking about me. I held my breath, the curtain brushing my face as he scanned the room. "Check the office," a voice replied through the radio. "If she's snooping, we need to know." He grunted and left, the door clicking shut. I waited, counting to 10, before slipping out. My legs shook as I hurried back to Sophie's room, the photos burning a hole in my phone. I needed to get them to Rachel Harper, my best friend and a child welfare attorney in Manhattan. But the groundskeeper's words echoed, "I can smell her." They were hunting me, and I was running out of places to hide. By evening, Sophie was visibly stronger. Without the drugs, her movements were steadier, her eyes brighter. I fed her the shake, whispering, "You're doing great, kiddo. We're going to fix this." She mouthed, "Thank you," and I felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it scared me. This girl, this brave, broken girl, had trusted me with her truth, and I wouldn't let her down. But the house was closing in. I found another camera in the dining room, its lens trained on the table where I'd left the binder. The burner phone I'd found in the kitchen drawer, hidden behind a jar of organic quinoa, held texts that chilled me. "She's not following orders. Eliminate loose ends if necessary." No names, no signatures, but the intent was clear. Someone wanted me gone, and I didn't know if it was the Whitakers or someone bigger, someone tied to the secret room Sophie had mentioned. I decided to search the basement, where Sophie thought the room might be. The stairs were narrow, the air damp and musty. I flicked on my phone's flashlight, revealing crates of wine and dusty furniture. At the far end was a steel door, padlocked. I tugged at the lock, but it held firm. A hum came from behind it, like machinery, and I pressed my ear to the metal. Voices, faint but distinct, argued inside. "She's a problem," one said, Edward's voice unmistakable. "We can't risk exposure." Another voice, unfamiliar, replied, "Handle it, or I will." I backed away, my heart pounding. The door rattled, and I sprinted up the stairs, tripping on the last step. The basement door slammed shut behind me, and an alarm blared, shrill and relentless. I was trapped. The lock was electronic, the keypad flashing red. I punched in random codes, my fingers slipping, as footsteps thundered above. The guard from last night appeared at the top of the stairs, his gun drawn. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his smile cold. "You're in the wrong place." I raised my hands, my mind racing. "I got lost," I lied, my voice shaking. "I was looking for the wine cellar." He didn't buy it, but he lowered the gun. "Back upstairs. Now." I obeyed, my legs like jelly, but as I passed him, I saw a key card clipped to his belt. If I could get that, I could get into the secret room. But not now, not with his eyes boring into me. That night, I sat with Sophie, the envelope's contents spread across her bed, the journal, the trust agreement, the USB drive. They were a map of the Whitakers' crimes, but incomplete. "Tell me about the secret room," I whispered, keeping my voice below the camera's range. She mouthed, "Basement. They talk about money." And me. Her eyes filled with tears. They said if I ever told, they'd make me disappear. I hugged her, careful not to jostle her tubes. "You're not disappearing," I promised. "I'm here." But my promise felt hollow. The texts, the guard, the voices behind the door. They were a noose tightening around us. I needed Rachel, but calling her meant risking interception. The Whitakers had eyes everywhere, and I was starting to wonder if Daniel was one of them. My phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with a new message. "You're out of time. Run." I stared at it, my breath shallow. Run where? To whom? The Hamptons were the Whitakers' kingdom, their influence woven into every police station, every courtroom. But Sophie's hand found mine, small and strong, and I knew I couldn't run. Not yet. Not until she was free. The text message burned in my mind like a brand. "You're out of time. Run." I stood in Sophie's room, her small hand clutching mine, the envelope of evidence, her journal, the trust agreement, the USB drive, hidden under her blanket. The Whitaker estate, with its marble halls and ocean views, was no longer a house. It was a cage, and we were the prey. The red light of the camera in the corner blinked relentlessly, a silent witness to our defiance. I was Claire Thompson, a 32-year-old pediatric nurse practitioner, and I'd just thrown myself into a war against a family who'd built an empire on lies. Sophie, the 9-year-old girl they'd drugged and silenced for her $10 million 0-cents trust, was counting on me. But the anonymous texts, the armed guard, the voices behind the basement door, they were closing in, and I was running out of moves. It was 4:03 a.m., the Hampton sky still dark beyond the window. Sophie's eyes, sharp and pleading, locked onto mine. "They're coming, aren't they?" she mouthed, her voice too risky to use with the camera watching. I squeezed her hand, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "Not yet," I whispered, my lips barely moving. "But we need to be ready." Ready for what? I didn't know. Escape? Confrontation? Or something worse, the guard's warning from hours ago, "Stick to the routine. Safer that way," echoed like a threat. Safer for who? Not for Sophie, whose childhood had been stolen. Not for me, now a target in a game I hadn't chosen. I slipped the envelope into my scrubs, tucking it against my waistband, and adjusted Sophie's blanket to cover the bulge. "Pretend to sleep," I told her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She nodded, closing her eyes but keeping one cracked open, a sliver of trust in a world that had betrayed her. I left the room, my heart pounding. and headed to the guest suite to plan. The estate was a labyrinth of wealth. Chandeliers glittering like frozen tears. Persian rugs muffling my steps, but every corner felt alive, watching. I locked the guest room door, a futile gesture against the Whitakers' reach, and pulled out my phone. The latest text stared back. Run. I typed a reply. Who are you? Why help us? But the message failed again, the number a ghost. I needed Rachel Harper, my best friend and a child welfare attorney in Manhattan. She was my lifeline, the only person I trusted to untangle this nightmare. But calling her now, with cameras and guards lurking, was a risk. I opened my laptop, connected to a secure VPN, and uploaded the photos I'd taken in Victoria's office. Falsified medical records, prescriptions for sedatives no child should take, the trust agreement and Sophie's journal pages followed, each upload a small rebellion against the Whitakers' control. I typed a quick email to Rachel. Found evidence of child abuse and fraud. Sophie's not disabled. Need your help. ASAP. Check cloud link. Don't call. House is watched. I hit send, my chest tight, and prayed the Whitakers' tech wasn't sophisticated enough to intercept it. A soft knock at the door made me jump. Mrs. Thompson? A woman's voice called, clipped and professional. My pulse spiked. It wasn't the maid's usual drawl or the cook's gruff tone. I shoved the laptop under the bed and opened the door a crack. A woman in a navy blazer stood there, her hair pulled into a tight bun, her eyes cold. I'm Miss Carter, estate manager, she said, her smile as warm as a knife. Mr. Whitaker asked me to check on you. Everything all right? Edward Whitaker, the patriarch, was in Barbados, or so I'd thought. My mind raced. Was she testing me? Had they seen me in Sophie's room? In Victoria's office? Fine, I said, forcing a yawn. Just jet-lagged from the move here. Sophie's stable. Her gaze flicked past me, scanning the room, and I prayed the laptop was hidden. Good, she said. We wouldn't want any complications. Breakfast is at 7. She left, her heels clicking down the hall, but her visit felt like a warning shot. I locked the door again, my hands shaking. The Whitakers were tightening their grip, and I was running out of time to act. By sunrise, the estate glowed with deceptive warmth, the ocean sparkling beyond the cliffs. I returned to Sophie's room, the binder of care instructions in hand to maintain the charade. She was awake, her face brighter without the drugs, but her eyes darted to the camera. I adjusted her feeding tube, whispering, "We're getting out of this." I sent evidence to a friend. She blinked twice, her signal for understanding, and I felt a surge of resolve. This girl, who'd taught herself to read while pretending to be lifeless, was stronger than anyone in this house. I wouldn't let her down. The binder's medication schedule loomed, but I'd flushed the morning dose already. Instead, I gave Sophie her nutritional shake, untainted, and logged a fake entry in the care chart. Every lie was a step deeper into danger, but every moment Sophie grew stronger was a victory. I needed more evidence, something undeniable to bring the Whitakers down. Sophie's journal had mentioned a secret room in the basement where Edward discussed her money. If I could find it, I might uncover the heart of their scheme. I waited until mid-morning, when the staff were distracted by deliveries, to slip downstairs. The basement door was locked, but I'd swiped a master key from the kitchen during breakfast, a risky move that had nearly gotten me caught by the cook. The stairs creaked under my weight, the air growing damp and heavy. My phone's flashlight revealed crates of vintage wine, cobwebbed furniture, and that steel door I'd found last night, its padlock gleaming. The hum of machinery was louder now, and I pressed my ear to the metal. No voices today, just the steady drone of something mechanical, a server, maybe, or a generator. I tugged at the padlock, but it held firm. The key didn't fit, and picking it was beyond my skills. Frustration clawed at me, but then I noticed a faint seam in the wall beside the door, barely visible. I ran my fingers along it, feeling a slight give, and pushed. A panel clicked open, revealing a keypad. My heart leapt. Sophie's birth date, April 12th, 16, had opened the safe in her room. I punched it in, holding my breath. The keypad beeped, green light flashing, and the door hissed open. Inside was a small, concrete room, lit by a single fluorescent bulb. A metal table held a laptop, a stack of ledgers, and a black briefcase with a strange symbol etched on it, a crescent moon inside a triangle. My skin prickled. Sophie had mentioned a stranger with a briefcase visiting Edward late at night. Was this his? I opened the laptop, but it demanded a password. The ledgers were worse. Pages of numbers, dates, and cryptic notes like transfer complete to Cayman account, and Voss confirms compliance. Dr. Harlan Voss, the name on Sophie's falsified records, was in deep with the Whitakers. I snapped photos, my hands shaking, and reached for the briefcase. It was locked, but a folded paper slipped from its handle. I unfolded it, my breath catching. It was a draft will dated last month, naming Edward, Margaret, and Victoria as Sophie's sole beneficiaries, overriding her trust. My stomach churned. They weren't just stealing her money, they were planning to erase her future entirely. I stuffed the paper into my pocket and turned to leave, but a soft click stopped me. The door was closing, the keypad flashing red. I lunged, but it slammed shut, the lock engaging with a finality that echoed in my bones. Panic surged. I pounded on the door, my fists bruising, but the concrete swallowed the sound. The air was thick, the hum of machinery deafening. My phone had no signal, the walls too thick for a call. I was trapped, and no one knew where I was. Sophie was alone upstairs, vulnerable, and the Whitakers or their silent partner could be watching. I sank to the floor, my mind racing. The guard, Miss Carter, the texts. Someone had lured me here, or I'd walked into a trap of my own making. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time blurred in the suffocating dark. My flashlight dimmed, the battery draining, and I forced myself to think. The keypad was my only way out, but guessing codes was futile. I searched the room, my hands scraping along the walls, and found a loose vent cover near the floor. It was narrow, barely wide enough for my shoulders, but it was a chance. I pried it off, the metal screeching, and crawled inside. The duct's cold steel biting my skin. Dust choked my lungs, but I pushed forward, praying it led somewhere safe. The duct sloped upward, branching into a maze of tunnels. I chose the path with airflow, my elbows raw from dragging myself along. Voices filtered through a grate above, Miss Carter, sharp and urgent. "She's not in her room. Check the basement." My heart sank. They were looking for me. I crawled faster, the grate looming ahead. It opened into a utility closet off the main hall, and I kicked it loose, tumbling onto the floor in a heap of dust and sweat. I was free, but not safe. I slipped into the hall, my scrubs filthy, and checked my phone. A new text. "You're lucky. Next time, you won't be." My blood ran cold. Someone had known I was trapped, had let me escape, or wanted me to think I had. I needed to get to Sophie, but the estate was crawling with staff. I ducked into a guest bathroom, splashing water on my face, and caught my reflection. My eyes were wild, my hair a mess, but the fire in my chest was unshakable. I was fighting for a child who'd been caged her whole life, and I wouldn't stop. Sophie was in her bed when I reached her, the camera's light still blinking. "I was so scared," she mouthed, her eyes wet. I hugged her, careful of the tubes, and whispered, "I found the room. They're planning something worse." Her face crumpled, but she nodded, her strength humbling me. I pulled the will from my pocket, showing her the date. "They want everything, Sophie, but we're going to stop them." I needed more evidence. Something to tie the Whitakers to the abuse, beyond the records and journal. Sophie's mention of a silent partner gnawed at me. Who was the stranger with the briefcase? I decided to check Victoria's suite, a lavish wing of the estate dripping with gold accents and designer clothes. The door was unlocked, a careless oversight, and I slipped inside, my heart pounding. The room was a shrine to Victoria's vanity. Mirrors, perfume bottles, a walk-in closet bigger than my apartment. But my eyes locked on a sleek laptop on her desk, its screen dark but inviting. Powered it on, praying for no password, but a login screen appeared. Sophie's journal had noted Victoria's arrogance. She used her birthday for everything. I typed August 15th, 83, and the screen unlocked. My breath caught. Emails filled the inbox, dozens marked confidential. I opened one from Edward, dated last week. Voss is pushing back, increase the dosage. We can't risk her talking. Another from an unknown address read, the syndicate expects payment by month's end. Deliver or the girl becomes collateral. My stomach twisted. A syndicate? Was this the silent partner or something bigger? I copied the emails to a USB drive, Sophie's, from the safe, and kept searching. A folder labeled Trust Amendments held drafts of legal documents, all designed to siphon Sophie's $10 million cents through offshore accounts. One email mentioned a $75 million cents estate tied to the Blackwell's oil fortune that Sophie would inherit at 25 if she controlled the initial trust. The Whitakers weren't just greedy, they were desperate, their real estate empire crumbling under hidden debts. I snapped photos, my hands trembling, and shut the laptop, but a creak outside the door froze me. I dove under the bed, the carpet rough against my cheek as Victoria's heels clicked into the room. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was in Barbados. Find her, she hissed into a phone. She's been in my office, I know it. My heart stopped. She paced, her shadow passing inches from my face, and stopped at the desk. The laptop's warm, she muttered. She's here. I held my breath, my body rigid as her heels moved closer. The bed skirt lifted, and I braced for discovery, but a knock at the door saved me. Miss Whitaker, the jet's delayed. Your father needs you. Miss Carter's voice called. Victoria cursed and left, the door slamming. I crawled out, gasping, and fled to Sophie's room. Victoria's back, I whispered, my voice shaking. Sophie's eyes widened, but she mouthed, I'm not afraid. Her courage fueled mine, but the emails, the syndicate, the will, they were a noose tightening around us. I needed to act, and fast. The next morning, I mailed a copy of the USB drive to Rachel, using a courier service from town to avoid the estate surveillance. The drive held everything: emails, records, Sophie's journal scans, the will. But as I drove back, a black SUV appeared in my rearview mirror, its tinted windows ominous. It accelerated, swerving into my lane, and I gripped the wheel, my heart pounding. The SUV nudged my bumper, forcing me toward the cliff's edge. I slammed the gas, weaving through traffic, and lost it at a red light, my hands shaking. The Whitakers knew I was digging, and they weren't playing games. Back at the estate, I found a tracking device under my car's wheel well, a small black box blinking red. My stomach dropped. They'd been following me, maybe since I arrived. I smashed it with a rock, my anger boiling, and switched to a staff vehicle, a beat-up Jeep in the garage. I couldn't trust anything in this house, not even my own belongings. Sophie was thriving, her movements fluid, her speech clearer. I brought her art supplies, and she drew vibrant landscapes, her hands steady. I want to go to school, she mouthed, her eyes shining. I want friends. My heart broke. She deserved a life, not a prison. I taught her simple puzzles, marveling at her quick mind, but every laugh was a reminder of the danger. The cameras watched, the staff lurked, and Victoria's early return meant the family was circling. I contacted Rachel via a burner phone I'd bought in town, keeping the call short. "It's worse than I thought," I whispered, hiding in a closet. "They're tied to a syndicate. Sophie's life is at stake." Rachel's voice was steady but urgent. "I've got the files. I'm working with the FBI, but you need to stay safe. Document everything, but don't confront them. They're dangerous." I hung up, my resolve hardening, dangerous or not. I wasn't leaving Sophie. That night, I searched for the stranger Sophie had seen, the man with the cryptic briefcase. Her journal mentioned late-night visits to Edward's study, so I slipped inside, the room heavy with leather and cigar smoke. A photo on the desk caught my eye. Edward with a man in a suit, the crescent moon symbol on his lapel. My skin prickled. Was this the silent partner? I rifled through drawers, finding a ledger with entries like payment to CM $2.00, M and Syndicate, terms accepted. The numbers were staggering, tied to offshore accounts and Sophie's trust. A shadow moved in the hall, and I ducked behind a curtain as a private investigator entered, his face hard. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, not looking at me. "You're in over your head. Leave now, or you won't leave at all." My heart raced, but I stayed silent, my body pressed against the wall. He scanned the room, his hand on a gun, and left, muttering into a radio. I waited, my breath shallow, and slipped back to Sophie's room, the ledger photos on my phone. The family returned at 2 a.m., a full week early, their voices echoing in the foyer. Edward's roar shook the walls. "Where is she? She's been negligent." I was in Sophie's room, checking her vitals, when Victoria burst in, her eyes wild. "You've been in my suite," she snarled, a syringe in her hand. My blood froze. Sophie needs her medication, now. I stepped between them, my voice steady. "She's fine. You're not touching her." The dining room was a battlefield. Edward loomed. Margaret whispered about a backup plan, and Daniel, my husband, avoided my gaze. I'd hinted at the trust fund days ago, and he'd defended his family, proving he couldn't be trusted. But Sophie changed everything. She walked in, her steps steady, and declared, "You're poisoning me for my money." The room erupted. Victoria lunged with the syringe. Edward roared, and I tackled Victoria, the needle skittering across the floor. I held up my phone, my voice shaking but firm. "The FBI has everything. Emails, records, your forged will. It's over." Edward's face twisted, but before he could speak, the doorbell rang. Rachel stood there with FBI agents and a CPS advocate, a warrant in hand. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, "we're here for Sophie." The agent searched the study, finding a ledger linking Edward to a crime syndicate, its crescent moon symbol unmistakable. Victoria broke, sobbing. "It was Daddy's idea. The business was failing. The syndicate demanded payment." Edward's denials crumbled as agents cuffed him. Sophie, trembling but brave, told the CPS advocate, "They made me sick. Claire saved me." Doctors later confirmed she was healthy. Her delays, from years of sedation, not disability.